Chapter 1. The Ember Child. The village of Falkendorf slumbered beneath a blanket of pale mist, its timber-framed houses sagging like old men under the weight of time. Beyond the wheat fields, the black line of the Drackwald forest loomed, a jagged wall of pine and oak, its trees older than empires, whispering secrets in a tongue no human ought to understand. Here, in this remote fragment of Reikland, the empire's wars and intrigues were little more than rumors carried by merchants and peddlers. Yet even in such a forgotten place, something stirred. Annaliese Faulkner was only 12, but the villagers already spoke of her with a wary reverence reserved for omens. She was small, pale, with straw-blonde hair that tangled like spider silk and eyes the color of storm water. The girl rarely smiled, and when she did, it was a strange, distant thing, as though her thoughts wandered far from the mud and timber of Falkendorf. It began with the fires. At first, they were minor, almost laughable, a candle lighting itself in the family hearth before her mother struck flint, a thin curl of smoke rising from an unlit lantern. Then, one afternoon in late spring, Annaliese sat in the yard plucking feathers from a dead crow she'd found by the well. She whispered to it, not prayers but nonsense, childish rhymes, and the feathers blackened and curled as if licked by an invisible flame. The smell of scorched meat filled the air, and when she blinked, the bird was nothing but ash, its eyes still glistening wetly before crumbling away. Her mother, Greta, saw it happen and made the sign of the hammer across her chest. "Sigmar preserve us," she whispered. But she did not tell her husband. Not yet. The animals felt it too. The Faulkner hounds, big mangy brutes bred to chase off wolves, would snap at strangers, their yellow teeth bared, but at Annaliese's approach they lowered their heads. She would kneel, murmur something soft, words no one else could quite hear, and their snarls would melt into whimpers. Once one of the dogs had been wounded by a trapper's snare, its leg twisted and bloody. Annaliese placed her small, cool hand on its flank and whispered again. The animal shuddered and stilled, not in pain but in submission, its breathing growing slow as if lulled into a trance. When she lifted her hand, the bleeding had stopped. That night, Greta dreamed of fire. She woke to find her daughter standing at the foot of the bed, eyes wide and vacant, hair plastered to her cheeks with sweat. Annaliese's hands were black with soot, though no hearth burned in the room. She whispered as if to herself. Greta strained to hear and caught only fragments. "Crown of ash. The hammer breaks," he calls from the dark. The girl did not remember this the next morning, but the dreams continued. Annaliese would wake screaming, clawing at her sheets, babbling of a burning god striding across a field of corpses. She spoke of a great hammer made of molten iron, falling again and again upon a cracked altar. Sometimes she would describe things Greta did not understand, symbols etched in bone, a black sun eclipsing the sky, rivers of blood snaking through forests that sounded too much like the Drackwald. Her small body would shudder with fever as she whispered, "He is watching. He's coming closer." Greta began locking the door at night. The villagers noticed. At the well, at the smithy, on the muddy road where traders passed, they muttered. Little Annaliese had strange eyes now, they said, too old. She'd been seen near the edge of the forest at dusk, speaking to someone no one else could see. Even the witch-finder's name began to surface in hushed tones, a threat whispered more out of habit than conviction. One evening, as the sky burned orange with the dying sun, Annaliese sat on the threshold of their cottage, staring at the fields. She raised one small hand, palm outward, as though grasping at something invisible. Greta watched from inside. The air above the girl shimmered. Heat coiled off her skin, though no fire burned nearby. Then slowly, a faint tongue of flame curled into existence above her palm. a flame without fuel, flickering pale blue like a corpse light. Annaliese's lips moved. She whispered, but this time Greta heard the words clear as a bell. "Do you see me, father of ash?" The flame winked out, and somewhere in the dark line of the Druckwald, something whispered back. Chapter 2. Harvest Festival. The day of the harvest festival dawned beneath a sky the color of beaten copper. In Falkendorf, this was the one day of the year when work halted, debts were forgiven, and the village forgot its worries long enough to drink itself stupid. Stalls were raised along the main road, heavy with apples, smoked fish, and black rye bread. Garlands of withered flowers hung between timber beams, the petals already crumbling like old parchment. The smell of roasting pork mingled with the tang of spilled ale, and above it all came the drone of the village fiddler, scraping out a tune that might once have been merry but now sounded like a dirge in disguise. Annaliese stood at the edge of the crowd, barefoot in the churned mud, her thin dress clinging to her knees. Her hair, still damp from a hurried morning washing, clung to her scalp in dark ropes. She watched the people whirl and stagger in the rough circle where the dancing took place. Their boots thudded, kicking up dry earth, their faces slick with sweat and drink. They looked like scarecrows brought to life, all jerky limbs and fixed smiles. Her parents stood not far from her, Greta, tense and pale, clutching a wooden cup. Her father, Hans, trying to mask his unease with heavy swallows of beer. He glanced at Annaliese often, as if checking she was still there. She had not smiled once all morning. The festival games began. The greased pig chase, the tug-of-war, the archery at straw men shaped like orcs. Children shrieked and ran with sticky hands, chasing one another with reed flutes. Above it all rose the smell of smoke from the central bonfire, a towering column of pale wood stacked like a pyre. Later tonight they would burn it in honor of Sigmar, and the priest would intone his tired blessings. Annaliese's head ached. At first it was a dull throb at the base of her skull. Then, as the crowd grew louder, it sharpened into a spike of pain, a nail driven inward. The noise of the fiddler's bow on gut string became unbearable, each note like claws scraping her nerves raw. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it did nothing. The voices of the villagers rose and fell like a tide. But now there were other voices beneath them, sibilant and low, curling through the gaps in their speech, words she almost understood. Her vision blurred. The bonfire was still unlit, yet she saw flames licking the stacked timber, pale and writhing, shapes within them like faces screaming soundlessly. Her knees buckled. She swayed. Greta saw and started toward her, but hands held her arm. "Let her be," he muttered. "It's just the heat." But Annaliese's eyes had rolled back, showing only the whites. Inside her skull, something opened. It felt like tearing paper, like a curtain being pulled aside. The world around her brightened to a searing clarity. The faces of the villagers, the cracks in the mud, the veins in the leaves overhead, all too vivid, too sharp. She could feel their hearts beating. Dozens of hearts, hammering in unison, feel their lungs drawing in air, smell the iron tang of their blood beneath sweat. The fiddler struck a high note, and something inside Annaliese broke. It came out of her like a sigh. A pressure she hadn't known she held, released all at once. The air around her warped. The bonfire wood groaned, as if something heavy had pressed upon it. People nearby staggered, clutching their heads. The fiddler's bow snapped clean in two, and he fell to his knees, retching. A baby began to scream, shrill and panicked. Then came the burst. There was no flash of light, no fire. It was like a ripple in the air, a heatless shockwave rolling out from where Annaliese stood. The villagers nearest were thrown backward, landing in the mud with cries of pain. A row of apples at a vendor's stall exploded into pulp, spraying red and yellow across startled faces. The bonfire timber cracked down the middle, as though struck by an invisible hammer. And the voices, the whispers only Annaliese could hear, roared with laughter. She fell to her knees, hands pressed to her temples, nails drawing blood from her scalp. Her body trembled as if caught between fever and frost. She tried to breathe, but each inhale burned like swallowing ash. Images seared her mind, a great hand of black iron reaching from the sky, a throne of charred bones, and a crowned figure with a face she could not see. Around her the festival dissolved into chaos. Men dragged wives from the mud, children sobbed, old people made the sign of the hammer with trembling fingers. Someone shouted, "Witchcraft!" Another spat, "Chaos!" Father Brennick, the priest, stumbled forward, his vestments splattered with cider and mud. "Stand back," he roared, but his voice cracked. Greta reached her daughter first, hauling her up, though Annaliese's small body felt suddenly heavy, as if filled with stone. Hans took one look at the devastation, the scattered stalls, the cracked pyre, the bleeding noses of those who had been closest, and his face drained of color. "This is not natural," he whispered, his voice swallowed by the murmurs of the crowd. But Greta clutched Annaliese to her chest and hissed back. "It's a gift, a sign. Sigmar has touched her." Yet when Annaliese lifted her head from her mother's arms, her eyes were not the gray of a storm. They glowed faintly, just faintly, with the dull orange of cooling embers. And in that moment, every villager present felt the same thing deep in their gut. Not awe, but fear. Chapter 3. The Sigmarite Priest. The road to Falkendorf was little more than a scar cut through the wilderness, a muddy strip flanked by leaning pines and pools of stagnant water where insects gathered in clouds. Few ever came this far from the Reikland heartlands. Fewer still came wearing the twin-tailed comet of Sigmar, and yet one wet autumn evening a man arrived under that symbol, his boots heavy with mud and his breath rising in pale plumes. Father Brennick was tall but stooped, as though the weight of his hammer-shaped reliquary bent his spine. His robes were travel-worn and rain-stained, smelling faintly of incense and horses. A half-hooded lantern swung from his belt, its glass blackened by old smoke, casting a weak orange glow across his angular, weathered face. He had the hard eyes of a soldier, not a monk, grey-blue and unblinking. Across his cheek ran a pale scar, the kind left by a blade drawn quickly and without mercy. When he reached the outskirts of the village, the hounds did not bark. They whimpered and slunk back to their kennels. The villagers had not expected a priest so soon after the harvest festival disaster. Rumors had already begun their slow, poisonous work. Some whispered Annaliese had been touched by Sigmar. Others spat the word witch, crossing themselves whenever she passed. Yet when Father Brennick's heavy boots squelched into the town square, and his deep voice rolled out over the crowd gathering under the dimming sky, even the boldest gossips fell silent. "I am Father Brennick," he intoned, setting down his hammer-headed staff. "I heard of miracles in this place. I heard of a child who calmed beasts, who healed wounds, who commanded the air and broke wood with her very breath. I have come to see her." His gaze fell on Annaliese, half hidden behind Greta's skirts. She felt it strike her like a weight pressing between her shoulders. His eyes seemed to look through her, past flesh and bone, to something deeper, something writhing in the dark of her soul. She shivered. The priest approached slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. Greta tried to pull Annaliese back, but Father Brennick raised a gloved hand. "No harm will come to her," he said, voice quiet but iron-edged. He knelt so that his scarred face was level with hers. "Child, do you know who you are?" Annaliese shook her head, mute. The memory of the harvest festival still burned behind her eyes, the bursting apples, the smell of scorched timber, the laughter, in the whispers no one else could hear. Brennick's expression softened, just enough to seem human. "You are a vessel," he murmured, loud enough for all to hear. "You are chosen, a child of the hammer. Sigmar's hand moves through you." The crowd gasped. Some dropped to their knees instinctively, pressing their foreheads into the damp earth. Others muttered prayers, crossing their fingers over their chests. Hans stared at the priest as though at a lifeline thrown into a storm. Greta's lips trembled, but she clutched Annaliese tighter, half with pride, half with fear. Brennick rose, turning to face the villagers. "You doubt because you have seen strange things," he said, his voice rising like a drumbeat. "But what is a miracle if not strange? Sigmar tests our faith with fire. This child is no witch. She is proof of his mercy in a world of filth and corruption. You will revere her, protect her, and cleanse your hearts of suspicion." He slammed the bottom of his staff into the mud. A ripple of sound rolled through the square like distant thunder. That night the villagers built a new altar in the chapel, a crude thing of oak planks and hammered nails. They laid garlands of dried flowers across it, lit candles until the little stone building flickered like a forge. Father Brennick led the prayers, his voice echoing through the rafters. He spoke of the twin-tailed comet, of Sigmar's hammer falling upon the unworthy, of the purity of his chosen. Annaliese stood at his side, her thin hands clasped before her, her eyes wide and glassy. They called her Child of the Hammer before the night was over. Old women kissed her fingers. Young men bowed their heads as she passed. Even Hans smiled for the first time in weeks, though his smile was brittle as glass. Greta wept softly into her shawl. But when the candles guttered and the villagers stumbled home to their beds, when even Father Brennick retired to the priest's chamber of the chapel to murmur his secret prayers, Annaliese lay awake in her little bed by the window. The autumn wind pressed cold fingers through the cracks in the wall. The moonlight was thin and sickly, and the voices came back. They were no longer whispers now. They slithered out of the dark corners of the room, coiling into her ears like smoke. She could not tell if they were inside her skull or outside, only that they were close, words in a language she did not know but somehow understood, promises, threats, laughter, low and wet. "Child of the hammer," they hissed, "child of the flame." She turned her face into the pillow, covering her ears, but it did not stop. "He is not your father, he is not your God. We are waiting." Her small body shook, teeth chattering, though she was not cold. The shadows on the ceiling shifted, at first like branches in the wind, then like skeletal fingers clawing at the wood. She squeezed her eyes shut and prayed to Sigmar as Father Brennick had taught her, but the prayer caught in her throat. And in the darkness, something laughed, soft and patient. Outside, the hounds began to whine again, their low cries rising until they became a chorus of fear that echoed through the sleeping village. Chapter 4. Beneath the Altar. The village chapel of Falkendorf had always been a humble thing. Stone walls gone mottled with moss, a slate roof that groaned beneath the weight of snow each winter, and a bell that hadn't rung true in 10 years. But now, under Father Brennick's stern guidance, it had become a sanctum. The villagers came in greater numbers each day, murmuring prayers beneath their breath as they left offerings of bread, wine, and hand-carved tokens shaped like hammers and comets. They came not for Sigmar, not really. They came for the girl. Annaliese sat in a pew each morning as Father Brennick chanted the old litanies. She never spoke, never looked up. Her hands remained folded, pale, and still. Yet the air seemed to change around her, warping the candlelight, making the cold chapel feel too warm, as if something else breathed there with them. It was on a fog-choked evening, while Annaliese sat alone in her corner of the chapel, that Brennick found the runes. He had stayed late after prayers, sweeping the stone floor and cleaning soot from the iron candle sconces. Greta had taken Annaliese home. He preferred it that way. The girl unsettled him, though he would never admit it aloud. The altar had always felt wrong. It was not the altar itself, but the ground beneath it. Brannick had sensed it from the moment he stepped foot into the chapel. Something pulled downward, a heaviness beneath his boots, like standing atop a buried forge. For weeks he had ignored it, chalking it up to fatigue, superstition. But now he could no longer deny it. Every time the girl prayed here, the shadows seemed to cling to the corners just a little longer. The candles burned lower than they should have. That night, alone, in the chapel's silence. Brannick moved the altar. It took great effort. The altar was not a light thing, oak-reinforced stone, darkened with age and stained with a century's worth of wax and sacrificial blood. With a grunt and the strength of a man still strong despite his years, he shifted it aside, inch by inch. Beneath he expected stone. He found bone. His breath caught in his throat. There, set into the floor beneath where the altar had rested, was a ring of skulls, human, too small to be animal, their mouths gaping open in silent scream. Not arranged in a careless burial heap, they formed a perfect circle, each skull facing inward. The space at their center was etched with something far worse. Runes. Not the hallowed script of Sigmar's priests, nor the clean lines of dwarfen ancestry. These were gouged deep into the stone, crude and ancient. They seemed to shimmer faintly in the torchlight, their edges still wet, though no blood had touched them in years. They pulsed, and they whispered. Brannick stepped back, bile rising in his throat. He drew his warhammer instinctively, as though it might banish what he saw. The runes laughed at him. He could feel it, mockery crawling through his thoughts like insects beneath his scalp. One rune in particular, larger than the rest, was shaped like an eye impaled by a spike. A chaos rune, undivided, blasphemous. He dropped to one knee, whispering the rite of banishment. The words came with difficulty, as if the very air choked on them. The runes glowed brighter, mocking his prayers. Then the whispers turned to words. She is the vessel. She is the flame. Not yours to shape, hammer, prized. Yours to serve. Brannick stumbled back and dropped his hammer. He made the sign of the comet across his chest, sweat pouring from his brow. For a moment the entire chapel seemed to breathe, stone, wood, and bone flexing around him like the belly of some sleeping beast. And then it stopped. The glow faded. The runes sank back into the stone, becoming nearly invisible again. The whispering ceased. Brannick stood in silence, his breathing ragged, chest heaving. His hands trembled. For the first time in years he felt fear not of man, not of beast or witch or war, but of something older, something that had waited beneath this village long before its first prayer was ever spoken. He dropped to his knees, not to pray, but to think. If the villagers knew what lay beneath their altar, panic would devour them. The Empire had little mercy for corruption, especially of the divine. And Annaliese? Whatever power stirred in her, it had begun here. But how? This was no coincidence. A child born in Falkendorf, manifesting forbidden power, now worshipped in a chapel built atop a chaos altar. It was a ritual without a ritualist, a prophecy, written in blood and hidden beneath sermons. He should burn it all. Destroy the chapel, call the witch hunters. But he looked at the stone again. The runes had not reappeared, the voices were silent, and the girl, what if she could be steered? What if she was not damned, but reclaimed? Brannick did not know the answer, so he replaced the altar. He spoke no word of what he'd seen, not to Greta, not to Hans, and certainly not to Annaliese. But from that day on, he never let her sit near the altar again. He moved her pew. He watched her with eyes that no longer saw her as a child, but as a riddle wrapped in fire. That night, as he knelt alone in the dark and repeated the canticles of purity, the flames of the candles behind him danced unnaturally high. And far below the chapel, in the cold stone beneath the altar, something stirred. Chapter 5. Dreams of Ash. The nights had grown long and heavy in Falkendorf. Cold mist rolled off the Drackwald like the breath of some great slumbering beast, curling between the houses and settling against the chapel walls. The villagers went to their beds earlier now, muttering their prayers and barring their shutters. Yet for Annaliese, sleep no longer brought rest. It brought only the dreams. They began as flickers, like glimpses of some other world leaking into her thoughts, shadows moving in the corners, the smell of ash where no fire burned. But each night the visions deepened, became sharper, more real. By the time the third week of autumn bled into winter, she no longer simply dreamed. She walked in those places, her bare feet treading upon scorched earth and splintered bone. The first dream of the Black Sun came without warning. Annaliese stood in a field of charred wheat, the stalks stiff and brittle like spears of black glass. A wind howled through them, carrying the acrid stench of burning flesh. Above her, the sky was the color of iron. The sun hung there, a vast black disk ringed by a sickly corona of orange fire, pulsing like a diseased heart. Shadows stretched across the land in impossible shapes, moving even when the wind fell still. All around her were people, villagers, soldiers, children, faces she did not recognize but somehow knew. They stood screaming, mouths open wide, though no sound reached her ears. Their eyes were gone, empty sockets weeping trails of blood that steamed in the heat. Some clawed at their faces until their nails snapped and tore away, others tore their hair out in fistfuls. They reached for her, hands blackened and blistered, as if she were the only water in a desert of fire. She could not move. Their fingers brushed her dress and left smears of soot that hissed and sizzled. The ground beneath her cracked, revealing rivers of molten metal, glowing orange and red. In the distance, towers of bone rose like jagged teeth, crowned with fluttering banners made of human skin. And there, beyond the screaming crowd, sat the throne. It was enormous, carved from an impossible lattice of bones fused with black iron, skulls woven into its arms and back. Veins of fire pulsed through it, glowing like magma under skin. It radiated a heat that seared her, even from where she stood. Perched upon it was the crowned skeleton. It was not simply dead. It was ancient, a thing of dust and will, its robes made of tattered banners stitched with runes she could not name. The crown upon its skull was forged from jagged shards of obsidian, studded with gems that pulsed like eyes. Smoke hissed from its open mouth. When it moved, it made no sound, but its bones clicked faintly, like distant chimes. It raised one bony hand. The crowd parted before it like a tide, their silent screams ceasing all at once. The only sound left was the hammering of Annaliese's heart and the crackling of fire as the black sun pulsed above. The skeleton gestured, and a path of ash cleared between them. With each step she took forward, the scorched ground left glowing footprints in her wake. When she reached the foot of the throne, the skeleton leaned forward. Its empty sockets burned with a dull orange glow, the same glow she had glimpsed in her own reflection since the harvest festival. When it spoke, its voice was not a sound, but a weight, pressing into her skull like iron brands. "Daughter of the Ember Vale?" She trembled, her lips parting, but no words came. "The hammer breaks. The flame endures. Come forth." It extended its hand. In its palm lay a crown of ash, brittle and smoldering, flakes drifting from it like black snow. Behind the skeleton, the throne seemed to pulse, its jagged edges twitching like the spines of a living thing. She wanted to run, she wanted to wake, but the crowd pressed in again, their eyeless faces inches from her skin, their teeth clicking in hunger. Some fell to their knees and began to claw at the earth until their fingers snapped off like twigs. Others began to burn, their flesh igniting in soundless flames, yet still they reached for her. Still they screamed without voices. The skeleton's hand did not waver. "Take your seat," it whispered, "and the sun will burn black for you." Her small fingers reached out. She didn't remember telling them to, but they did. The crown of ash crumbled beneath her touch, yet did not fall. It reformed as she held it, knitting itself from smoke and cinders until it fit perfectly between her palms. It was warm, almost gentle. And then the screaming came back. The crowd shrieked, a deafening wall of sound like 1,000 pigs slaughtered at once. The black sun pulsed, sending down a shaft of fire that struck the throne, igniting it in a roar of heat. The skeleton's jaw fell open, its crown tumbling from its skull as its hands clawed at the air. The earth cracked. The rivers of molten metal surged upward, swallowing the crowd, boiling them into ash. Their eyeless faces disintegrated into smoke, and Annaliese woke screaming. Her body thrashed in her narrow bed. Sweat poured off her skin, though the room was freezing. She clawed at her sheets until they ripped under her nails. Greta rushed in, clutching her daughter's shoulders, trying to hold her still, whispering prayers. Hans hovered in the doorway, his face pale, his fists clenched at his sides. Annaliese's eyes snapped open. They glowed faintly in the candlelight. She gasped like a drowning child dragged from water. Her hands shook as if still holding something. Greta followed her gaze and saw the faint black smear of ash on Annaliese's palms. When her daughter finally spoke, it was not in her own voice, but a whisper rasped through cracked lips. "He wants me to sit." And outside the window, unseen by the family, a thin snow of black ash drifted down upon Falkendorf, though no fire burned anywhere near. Chapter 6. The Witch Hunter Comes. He arrived at dawn, riding a black mare through the cold mist, cloak snapping like a banner behind him. The hoofbeats echoed down the dirt road leading into Falkendorf, each strike punctuating the dread that seemed to grip the village like a vice. Dogs slunk away and whined. Birds fell silent. Even the fog seemed to withdraw before him, as if unwilling to touch him. His name was Matthias Krell, and though no villager had seen him before, all knew what he was. A witch hunter. He wore a broad, weather-stained hat pulled low over sunken eyes, and a long coat of dark leather with iron clasps that clinked when he moved. His left arm bore a bracer carved with holy symbols, scorched from countless burnings. At his hip hung 2 pistols, each gleaming and oiled, as well as a blessed silver dagger. Across his back was strapped a Zweihander, wrapped in parchment scripture, its hilt scorched by old blood. But more chilling than his weapons was his presence, cold and unyielding as the stone of a tomb. His eyes were gray, colorless pits behind shadow, and when he looked at you, it was not like being seen, but weighed. He dismounted in silence, tethering his horse outside the chapel. A small gathering had already formed in the square. Word traveled fast in Falkendorf. Greta stood clutching Annaliese tightly, her face drawn. Hans remained beside them, jaw set, one hand resting near the haft of a woodcutter's axe. Father Brennick stood before the altar, his expression unreadable. Matthias Krell entered the chapel with the stride of a man inspecting a crime scene. His boots thudded on the stone floor. He looked once at the girl, then turned to Brennick. "Who is she?" he said, voice like iron on stone. "Child," Berenik replied calmly. "A girl gifted by Sigmar." Krell's eyes did not blink. "Or cursed by darker things." He stepped forward, standing tall over Annaliese. "Miracles do not burst skulls and split pyres in half." The silence hung like a gallows rope. Krell's hand moved fast, too fast for Greta or Hans to react. He seized Annaliese's arm and yanked up her sleeve. She didn't cry out. Her skin was pale, unmarked, until she blinked. And for just a second, a faint symbol shimmered beneath the surface of her skin. A curling, angular rune. Not drawn in ink, but burned in flesh, like heat beneath porcelain. The design was orange. Krell's face darkened. "Chaos leaves marks," he said coldly, "no matter how deeply you bury them." Berenik stepped forward. "She passed the purity rite I performed. She is not corrupted." "You are not a Templar, priest," Krell snapped. "And purity rites can be fooled. Chaos is a serpent. It hides in the folds of prophecy, in miracles, in dreams, especially in dreams." At that, Annaliese finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He's watching you, too." Krell's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. He released her arm and turned back to the altar. From his coat he withdrew a long, narrow case wrapped in velvet. He set it down on the altar, opened it slowly, revealing a row of polished metal instruments, each more brutal than the last. Iron brands, tongue clamps, piercing rods etched with warding runes, and in the center a silver-bound book. Greta shrieked and rushed forward. "She's just a child." Krell raised one hand, not to strike, but to halt. "She will not be harmed. Yet." His eyes never left Annaliese. "But I will test her. If she burns, she was never innocent." He gestured, and 2 villagers stepped forward, men Krell had already spoken to, their loyalty won with fear or coin. They held Annaliese firmly, though she did not resist. Her face was blank, her eyes were wide and unreadable. Krell opened the silver-bound book and began to chant. The words were not meant for comfort. They were jagged, ancient, filled with sigils that scraped across the soul. As he spoke, the air in the chapel grew heavy. Candles sputtered and hissed. The iron chains on the wall clattered of their own accord. Then he reached into the case and drew out a small, wickedly curved brand. Its tip glowed faintly red, not from heat, but something else. He held it inches from Annaliese's skin. "This is no iron," he said. "It bears the touch of Sigmar's own fire. If chaos dwells within her, it will scream." Greta turned away, burying her face in Hans' chest. Berenik stood still, watching with cold detachment, though sweat gleamed on his brow. Krell pressed the brand against Annaliese's palm. Her skin hissed. The scent of burning flesh filled the chapel. She did not scream. She did not even flinch. Instead, the brand itself squealed, a shrill metallic sound, as if the silver hated what it touched. Krell recoiled, dropping the iron to the floor. It clattered and spun, its red glow gone. Where it had touched her, Annaliese's palm was not blistered, but blackened, cracked like old embers. The rune was visible now, perfectly formed. And then the candles went out. Every single flame in the chapel died at once. Darkness swallowed them whole, and in that void a voice rose, not from any throat, but from the air itself. A whisper spoken through 1,000 teeth. She has already been chosen. When the candles flared back to life, Krell was on one knee, sweat pouring down his face. Annaliese stood untouched. The rune had vanished again. The chapel was silent. Krell stood, slowly. His eyes were wide, lips pale. He said nothing. He repacked his instruments, shut the case, and turned to the villagers. "Fias." not yet claimed, but she walks the knife's edge. He turned to Brennick. Watch her. If she strays, burn her. He looked back at Annaliese one last time. And if you dream again, girl, pray it is not him you see. Without another word, he strode out into the mist and mounted his horse. He did not look back, and Annaliese stood in the flickering light, her palms still tingling with the echo of a brand that had tried to hurt her, but failed. A small smile played at her lips, and in the deepest corners of the chapel, the shadows watched and pulsed. Chapter 7. The Purity Trial. The next day, the village square was turned into a courtroom. The sky above Falkendorf had soured. Choking clouds veiled the sun in a pale, jaundiced light, and a cold wind howled through the crooked chimneys. The air stank of wood smoke and fear. Villagers gathered in silence, forming a wide, wary circle in the square. No music played, no children laughed. Even the hounds kept their distance, ears flat, tails tucked. "Ahini, all of you!" shouted a man. At the center stood a tall iron stake driven deep into the soil, blackened from old use. Chains coiled around its base like sleeping serpents. The kindling stacked beneath it had been freshly chopped. Nothing was spoken aloud, but everyone knew what it meant. The purity trial had begun. Matthias Krell stood beside the stake, his coat heavy with rain and dust, the crimson wax of his holy seals cracked and flaking. He held a long scroll of parchment, brittle and scarred with countless ink blots, bearing the 12 measures of divine judgment. At his side stood Father Brennick, grim-faced and silent, his staff gripped tightly in one hand. And beside them stood Annaliese. She looked so small, so breakable in her gray smock. Her bare feet were streaked with mud. Her wrists were shackled in iron manacles, her arms bound in front of her. Yet her posture was straight, her expression unreadable. The wind played with her hair, lifting strands of it like flames caught in a breeze. Krell stepped forward. "By the decree of his most holy order of the silver flame," he declared, voice loud and sharp, "this child, Annaliese Faulkner of Falkendorf, shall be subjected to trial by purity. If she is untouched by chaos, Sigmar's light shall preserve her. If she is damned," his voice dropped an octave, "we will see the truth revealed in pain and flame." Greta sobbed aloud. Hands held her fast, jaw clenched, but said nothing. No one moved to stop it. 2 of Krell's chosen villagers came forward, armed with torches and grim expressions, and fastened the chains around the iron stake. They worked quickly, professionally. Annaliese made no sound. Her eyes swept over the crowd, pausing briefly on each face. She met each stare, unblinking. When her gaze landed on Father Brennick, he flinched. Krell raised a long iron rod, cold at first glance, but runes of gold and silver were etched into its shaft. A purity scepter. It hummed in his grip. "She will endure 3 rites," Krell said, "by flame, by metal, and by invocation." He stepped toward her. The first rite began. One of the villagers stepped forward, bearing a heavy torch. Without fanfare, he thrust it into the kindling beneath the girl's feet. The dry wood caught quickly. Flames leapt up with a hiss, licking at her ankles. The crowd murmured. Someone gasped. Greta screamed. Annaliese stood still. The fire curled around her legs, clawing upward. Her smock began to blacken, then char. The smell of burning cloth and skin hit the air. But she did not scream. She did not beg. Her expression twisted, but not in fear. It was concentration, fury even, as if she were holding something back. Her eyes fluttered shut. Her lips moved. Whispers. Silent at first, then clearer. She was speaking to someone. The flames surged higher. Krell raised his hand, and the torchbearer doused the fire with a bucket of sand. Smoke billowed upward. The kindling collapsed into a bed of glowing embers. Annaliese's legs were blackened, blistered, and bleeding, but she still stood. She sagged slightly, body shaking. Her eyes opened. They glowed, only faintly, but enough to make Krell narrow his own. "The second rite," he growled. "The trial by metal." He stepped forward with the purity scepter, its runes now alive with radiant heat. He pressed the red-hot head of the rod against the girl's bare shoulder. The hiss was instantaneous. Flesh seared and split. The smell was unbearable, charred meat and boiling blood. Annaliese cried out this time, a short, strangled sound, but she did not collapse. Her knees buckled. She coughed, spat black phlegm, and bit down on her lower lip until blood streamed down her chin. Krell removed the rod. There, in the scorched flesh of her shoulder, was no brand, no chaos mark, only torn, burned skin. The purity scepter had left no stain. But as Krell leaned in to inspect it closer, something happened. The wound pulsed, just once, and healed visibly. Flesh knitted together before his eyes, blisters dried, skin reformed, pale and raw, but whole. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Krell jerked back, eyes wide. His voice trembled for the first time. "That is not healing, that is corruption." Father Brennick's voice cut in, calm and firm. "Or it is Sigmar's mercy." Krell turned to him, furious. "You would call this divine?" Brennick did not answer. He only gestured to the scroll in Krell's hand. "The final rite." Reluctantly, Krell opened the silver-bound book of invocation and began to read aloud. The third rite was of invocation, a litany meant to reveal demonic possession or corruption. The words were powerful, ancient, and as they filled the square, the air grew thick. A wind rose not from the sky, but from the ground, curling upward like steam from a boiling pot. Annaliese trembled. Her lips moved again, but this time her whispers were audible, words in a tongue none recognized, harsh and guttural, like the grinding of bone and stone. Krell's voice faltered. The shadows lengthened. The villagers stepped back. And then Annaliese screamed, loud and shrill, filled with pain and something else. Joy. A pulse of force burst from her chest, knocking Krell backward and throwing the torchbearers to the ground. Her chains shattered, snapped clean in half. And then the power vanished. Annaliese collapsed to the ground, sobbing, steam rising from her scorched skin. Krell rose slowly, shaken, staring at her. No rune appeared, no demon rose, no mark burned on her skin. She had survived, passed. Barely. He stared down at her as she curled into herself, silent and broken. Then, slowly, he spoke. "The child is clean," he said. The villagers cried out in relief. Greta collapsed into tears. Hans knelt beside his daughter, covering her body with his coat. But Krell did not rejoice, he did not kneel, he did not smile. He turned to Father Brennick and whispered, "This is not over." And in the days that followed, he made no move to leave. He did not pack. He did not dismiss the trial. He stayed, watching, waiting, because Matthias Krell knew one truth better than any, that chaos did not always scream. Sometimes it smiled. Chapter 8. The Forest Whispers. The wind shifted on the 8th day after the trial. It came from the west, from the black-blooded heart of the Drakewald, and carried with it the stench of mold, rotting leaves, and something older, sweet, cloying, metallic. The kind of scent that clings to bones long after flesh has rotted away. Annaliese smelled it before anyone else. She stood alone in the orchard behind her family's cottage, barefoot in the frost-stiff grass, her bandaged legs trembling but holding fast. The scars from the purity trial had not faded. Some never would. But the pain had dulled into a constant throb, a thrum like a second heartbeat deep in her skin. And now the forest called. She could hear it, not with ears, not like speech, but in the way trees creaked where no wind stirred, in the soft rustling of brittle leaves that seemed to form words. The rhythm of the forest had changed. It no longer whispered warnings or death like it once had. No, it beckoned. She did not tell her mother where she was going. Greta slept fitfully these days, crushed under the weight of fear and faith. Hans had taken to drinking again. Father Brennick had stopped praying aloud in the chapel. Krell watched from windows and shadows like a hound on a scent, but even he couldn't follow her when she stepped from Falkendorf's dirt roads into the tree line's embrace. The edge of the Drakewald forest was like stepping through a curtain. The moment she crossed the first row of trees, the light changed. The sky vanished behind a tangled ceiling of gnarled branches. The sun became a faint ghost. Sound warped, the chirping of birds became shrill and too fast, like knives tapping porcelain, and the rustle of leaves was wet and heavy, like the shifting of entrails. Annaliese did not flinch. She walked. The earth was soft beneath her feet, covered in damp moss and black leaves that stuck to her soles. Vines hung like nooses from the trees. Pale fungi clung to trunks like barnacles. From time to time, she passed animal bones, picked clean and brittle, strewn in spirals or sunk into the roots. Once, she stepped on a skull, small and human-shaped. It cracked beneath her heel with a dry, hollow pop. Still she walked. The whispers grew clearer the deeper she went. They came from the branches, the earth, even the air itself. They didn't speak in any tongue she knew, but she understood. Child of the ash, daughter of veil and fire, burning seed. They were ancient voices, hungry and gentle, curious and cruel. They did not love her, but they knew her, and that made the air thick with expectation. The deeper she walked, the more the forest changed. Trees grew twisted and leaned over her path as if bowing. Pools of stagnant water reflected skies that did not match the one above. At one point she saw her reflection blink before she did. And then she saw him. The boy. He stood in a clearing, framed by trees that bent inward as if afraid to touch him. His skin was pale, not the pale of sickness or sunlessness, but a luminous, unnatural white, like moonlight poured into a body. His hair hung in limp strands the color of bone, and his eyes were solid black, without iris or white. He wore no shoes, no cloak, just a tunic of something too smooth to be cloth and too dry to be skin. He smiled at her. "You took your time," he said, in a voice that was neither boy nor man, neither old nor young. His words made her stomach twist, not in fear, but recognition. She didn't answer. "You've seen him, haven't you?" he continued. "The throne of bone, the black sun, the fire that does not burn." Her mouth opened slowly. "You're not real." The boy laughed. It was a sound like shattering mirrors. "Neither are dreams, but they shape you all the same." He stepped toward her. The forest held its breath. "Do you want to see what's beneath it all?" he asked, tilting his head. "To see the truth that writhes behind the bark and bone and him? You only need to touch it." From behind his back he drew a small object, a fragment of something. It looked like part of a crown made of fused ash and bone, still faintly smoldering. He extended it toward her. The whispers exploded in her ears. "I claim it. We burn for you." She reached forward. And then, "Annaliese!" The shout came like a thunderclap. She recoiled. The boy's face twisted, not with anger but with disappointment. His black eyes narrowed, and the ash fragment crumbled in his hand. He looked past her toward the voice and hissed. "They'll break you," he said, "just like they broke all the others." "Who?" she started, but the boy was already backing away. "You'll come again," he said softly. "When you're ready. When you stop fearing the fire." And then he was gone. Not banished, not turned and walked, just gone. One blink, and the clearing was empty. Annaliese! It was Hans. She turned and saw him crashing through the brush, sweat-soaked and wild-eyed, a woodsman's axe gripped in both hands. Behind him came Father Brennick, red-faced and panting, prayers falling from his lips in sharp bursts. The priest carried a lantern that flickered like it fought to stay lit in the shadows. They saw her and stopped dead in their tracks. "Sigmar's blood," Hans gasped, eyes darting around the empty clearing. What is this place?" Father Brennick said nothing, but his gaze fell to the blackened leaves around her feet, the soot on her hands, and the way the trees seemed to bend inward toward the spot where the boy had stood. His face paled. Hans rushed forward, scooping her into his arms. "What were you thinking, girl?" he roared, half in terror, half in fury. "The Drakewald is death, beastmen, worse." But Annaliese didn't hear him. She stared back into the woods where the pale boy had stood, her ears ringing with the whisper of branches. The ash was still on her palms, smoldering faintly. And the forest whispered behind her, just out of reach, "We are always here." Chapter 9. Fire and Faith. Falkendorf was a village unraveling. At first the signs were small. Missed curfews, doors locked earlier than usual, neighbors no longer speaking across fences. Then came the gatherings in secret, whispered prayers at candle-lit tables, children kept inside even during market days, and hushed voices invoking Sigmar's wrath as much as his mercy. Some homes bore new symbols carved hastily above doorways, double hammers burning comets, protective wards etched with shaking hands. Others removed the hammer entirely and replaced it with blank wood, as though afraid to commit to any side at all. Annaliese Faulkner had become more than a child. To some she was a beacon, the ember child, the flame-blessed, the walking miracle. Mothers brought sick infants for her to touch. Farmers left gifts of honey and wheat at her doorstep. Old Hilda the midwife claimed her failing eyesight had cleared after Annaliese had once looked into her eyes and whispered a word no one else could understand. But to others, she was a curse. They spoke of the harvest festival, the burned fruit, the split altar. They pointed to the black sun that now appeared on cloudy days, a faint, unnatural blot in the sky. They whispered of her sleeplessness, of how the chapel candles flickered and hissed in her presence, of how the hounds no longer barked when she passed, but howled, low, keening, almost mournful. And the whispers deepened when the accidents began. It started with Marta Grunfeld, a seamstress who had always looked at Annaliese with pinched suspicion. One morning she slapped the girl for staring too long at her boy. Her hand never made contact. Instead it burst into flame, silent and sudden. No smoke, just fire that devoured flesh like dry paper. Marta screamed and flailed, dropping to her knees in the mud, her fingers blackening into curling claws before the fire extinguished itself, leaving behind only bone and smoking sinew. She lived, but her hand never healed. Annaliese had not touched her, not even raised her voice. Only stared. Father Brennick declared it divine judgment. Krell called it witchfire. From that day on, the village split in two. Father Brennick began holding daily services dedicated to the Emberlight, preaching that Sigmar's hammer forged more than just weapons, that it forged chosen vessels, children of fire meant to carry the flame of renewal. He invoked Annaliese's name with fervor, even adapting sermons to include her as the flame touched, a being blessed to burn away the rot of the empire. But Krell stood in the back during each sermon, arms crossed, face carved from stone. He never left the village. He watched. He asked questions. He wrote letters that no courier ever seemed to collect. And at night, from his rented room in the smithy, lights flickered behind the windows long past midnight. Meanwhile, Annaliese changed. She no longer slept properly. Her eyes, once a soft gray, now glimmered faintly orange in low light. Her skin remained cold to the touch even when feverish. But worse still were her emotions. Intense, unpredictable, and often explosive. One evening, Greta scolded her for sneaking off again toward the forest's edge. The girls said nothing, but the walls of their cottage began to sweat, beads of moisture running down wooden beams as the air filled with heat. The hearth ignited without spark. Flames danced in the lanterns. The very floorboards groaned underfoot, as if boiling from beneath. When Greta tried to embrace her, her hands blistered. Another time, a child named Elias threw mud at Annaliese during market day. He mocked her, called her witch daughter. When she turned to look at him, his nose exploded in a fountain of blood. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed, screaming that something was inside his head, clawing at his thoughts. He did not wake for 3 days. Some villagers began sleeping in shifts. Others sharpened knives. A few left altogether. But they chose to do. But still, Annaliese walked the village with a strange calm. She seemed above it, neither proud nor shamed. Her steps were soft, deliberate. She spoke only when necessary, and always in a voice that made the air seem to hush around her. End of chapter 30. On the eve of Hexensnacht, she stood at the center of the square, unbidden, alone. She lifted one hand to the sky. No words, just a gesture. The clouds parted. A black sun shone through, low and heavy like a wound in the sky. People screamed. Some fled. Others knelt. And from the trees at the village's edge came the howls, not of wolves, but something older, deeper, bone-deep howls that sounded like praise. Father Brennick fell to his knees, arms raised in ecstasy. The ember veil is upon us. Krell did not kneel. He stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "Stop this," he commanded. "Now." Annaliese turned. Her eyes blazed, truly blazed, flickering with inner flame. "Do not point iron at fire," she said. "You will only burn." Krell drew the pistol. The ground at his feet cracked. Flames erupted around his boots in a ring, separating him from her. He stood frozen as heat licked his coat, his face bathed in orange light. For a moment, the witch hunter, veteran of wars, killer of warlocks and beasts alike, hesitated. Annaliese turned away. The ring of fire vanished, and Krell lowered the pistol. But in his heart, he knew. She was no longer a girl. She was becoming something else. And if they waited too long, if he waited, she would become something they could never burn. Chapter 10. The Mark Revealed. The nights in Falkendorf had become blacker than pitch. The moon rose wan and red, and the mist crawled over the thatched roofs like the fingers of a corpse. Even the chapel bell refused to ring properly. Its tone was dull, as if the metal had soured. People locked their doors early, and only the mutter of hurried prayers rose above the wind. Inside the Faulkner cottage, the darkness was thick and damp. Greta and Hans lay restless in their straw mattress, listening to the distant groans of the Drakewald and the faint hiss of fire somewhere beyond the village. Their daughter had not been the same since the purity trial. Neither had they. That night, Annaliese lay in her small bed near the window, eyes closed but body trembling. The pale moonlight crept through the shutters and cut across her face like a blade. Sweat soaked her sheets despite the chill. Her lips moved, whispering names and words in no tongue her parents knew. Then came the convulsions. It began with a tremor in her hands. Her fingers twitched as if plucking invisible strings. Her breath caught in her throat. Then she arched her back violently, head snapping back, eyes rolling into white. A strangled hiss tore from her throat. Too low for a child, the sound of it froze Greta where she lay. Hans sat up instantly. "She's dreaming again," he muttered, voice hoarse. Greta bolted from the bed, rushing to Annaliese's side. "Annaliese, wake up! Wake up, my girl!" But Annaliese did not wake. Her body convulsed harder, the veins in her neck bulging. Her nails clawed at her sheets, tearing through fabric. Her whispers became a chant, deep and harsh, a rhythm like hammers striking anvils. He comes. Black sun, broken hammer, fire rises. Greta tried to hold her but recoiled with a cry. Annaliese's skin was hot, fever hot, yet beneath the heat it pulsed like the beat of another heart. The light from the window flickered, dimmed, then flared. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the walls. Hans stumbled to the bedside. "Sigmar, protect us," he muttered, over and over, clutching the hammer sliceand hanging from his neck. And then Annaliese screamed. It was not a child's scream. It was a tearing sound, like iron being ripped apart, echoing off the walls until the shutters rattled. Greta clapped her hands over her ears. Hans dropped to his knees. Annaliese's skin began to change. Starting at her chest, just above her heart, something burned its way through. Not ink, not blood. Light. It seared upward in curling lines beneath her skin like molten veins, glowing orange and red. The lines spiraled outward across her collarbone, down her arms, up her neck. They formed runes, twisting, jagged, obscene. At their center, above her heart, a single shape blazed brightest of all, a spiked eye burning like a brand hammered straight into her soul. The Chaos Rune. Greta gasped and staggered backwards, slamming into the wall. "No, no, Sigmar, forgive me." She made the hammer sign over and over until her knuckles bled. Hans stared, wide-eyed, lips trembling. Then he began to pray, louder, his voice cracking as he recited the litany of purity. "Sigmar's hammer smites the heretic. Sigmar's hammer smites the heretic." Again and again, louder and louder until his throat was raw. Greta fell to her knees beside him. "We can't let them see," she hissed, tears streaming down her face. "Not the witch hunter, not Father Brennick. They'll burn her. Hans, they'll burn her." Hans's prayers rose to a shout, drowning out her words. His face was pale and wet with sweat. His hands gripped the hammer's ample so tightly it cut into his palms. Annaliese's body lifted from the bed. Only a hand's breadth at first, but enough for the straw mattress to shift and sag beneath her. Her arms stretched outward, palms up, fingers splayed. The runes blazed hotter, brighter, until their glow painted the entire room in blood-orange light. Her hair floated as though submerged. The whispers from her mouth became a guttural growl, layered with other voices, not hers, not human. The hammer breaks, the flame endures, the vessel rises. The window cracked, splinters of frost-rained glass falling inward. The air smelled of burning copper. Shadows writhed on the walls, shapes of antlers, claws, fanged mouths. Greta crawled forward on her knees, sobbing. "Please, Annaliese, stop before they hear." The girl's eyes snapped open. They were nothing but embers, deep orange pits. Then, suddenly, the light went out. The runes dimmed. Her body fell back to the mattress with a soft thud. The room plunged into stillness, the only sound Greta's sobbing and Hans's hoarse prayers. Annaliese lay perfectly still. Her skin was pale again, The rune had vanished, but faint traces of black ash marked where it had burned through. Her breathing was shallow, lips cracked, eyes closed. Hans slumped forward, clutching the hammer to his chest. Greta wiped at the ash with shaking fingers, but it smeared, staining her hands black. "We hide her," she whispered fiercely. "We hide her until it's gone." Hans stared at the girl, his jaw trembling, his prayers finally falling silent. In the cold dark of the cottage, Annaliese's fingers twitched once, and faintly, deep beneath the floorboards, something whispered back. Chapter 11. The First Sacrifice. The morning began with an absence. Little Klaus Meyer, no more than 7 winters old, had not returned from gathering wood along the village's southern edge. At first, no one thought much of it. Children strayed often into the tree line, drawn by the promise of mushrooms or game. But when the mist began to rise from the Drakewald, rolling over the fields like spilled milk, and his mother's frantic calls went unanswered, unease spread like a sickness. By midday, the entire village was searching. Men with lanterns scoured the bramble-thick edges of the forest. Women with shawls wrapped tight against the cold called his name until their voices cracked. Even Krell joined them, moving with slow deliberation, eyes scanning for signs. His gloved hand rested on the pistol at his hip. Annaliese remained in the square, seated on the worn stone of the well, head bowed. She did not join the search. She did not speak. She sat with her hands clasped tightly, staring at the ground as though reading something in the dust. Greta hovered nearby, torn between keeping her daughter from prying eyes and appearing too defensive. By dusk, no one had found him. The mist had thickened into a living thing, curling between the houses, creeping along the dirt lanes. The air tasted like metal. And then Hans stumbled into the square, his face pale, his boots black with mud. "I found him," he rasped, "by the chapel." The villagers surged forward as he led them. Even Krell's usual calm cracked, his pace quickened. Brennick muttered prayers under his breath, gripping his staff so tightly his knuckles whitened. They followed Hans past the chapel to the field beyond, where the earth rose slightly, before giving way to the forest's edge. The grass there had turned black. It was not frost nor shadow, it was scorched. Klaus lay at the center, or rather what had been Klaus. His small body was curled into itself, knees drawn to his chest, arms clasped tight as if in terror. His skin was blackened, charred through in places, ribs visible like white teeth through cracked meat. His hair had burned away. His eyes were gone, empty sockets filled with ash. Steam rose faintly from his body, carrying the sweet, nauseating stench of cooked flesh. Around him, the ground bore symbols. They were carved deep into the earth, not with tools, but as though burned there by a fire that moved like a hand. Jagged spirals, hooked lines, circles within circles. Some glowed faintly red, fading as the villagers watched. Others pulsed like dying embers. All pointed inward to the boy's body. A collective gasp rose. Someone retched into the grass. Father Brennick fell to his knees, tracing a sign of the hammer over and over across his chest, his lips moving too fast to form words. "Sigmar, preserve us," he whispered. "Sigmar, preserve us." But it was Krell who broke the silence. "Done this." His voice was low, but cut through the murmurs like a blade. "The girl, the one you call blessed, this is no miracle, this is sacrifice." Heads turned slowly toward the square where Annaliese had been sitting. She was already there, standing just beyond the circle of scorched earth, her pale face blank. Her hands were clenched at her sides, ash flecked her smock. Her hair stirred, though no wind blew. Greta rushed to her side at once, throwing an arm in front of her. "She hasn't moved from my sight," she cried. "She's been with me all day. She hasn't. She couldn't." But Krell was already moving forward. His pistol came free of its holster with a slow, deliberate sound of leather against steel. He did not point it, but the weight of it in his hand silenced the crowd. "The marks," he said. "The burned child. The timing. You saw what she is in the trial. You saw what she carries under her skin." "I or not," Annaliese began, but her voice cracked, small and trembling. She looked at the body, at the scorched grass, at the symbols still faintly glowing. And then the ground hissed. Everyone stepped back as a ripple of heat rolled outward from the boy's corpse. The scorched symbols flared, bright for a heartbeat, then died. The air grew heavy, filled with a smell like blood and charcoal. From the boy's cracked lips escaped a puff of black ash that curled upward and vanished. Annaliese's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't," she whispered. "I didn't do this." Krell leveled his gaze at her. "Then tell me who did." Annaliese said nothing. Her fists shook. The orange glow flickered faintly behind her irises. Greta clutched her tighter. "She's a child," she screamed at the crowd. "She's ours. She's not some monster you can burn." But the villagers were already whispering. Mothers pulled their children close. Men made the sign of the hammer. Old Hilda spat into the dirt and muttered a prayer against evil. Their eyes shifted from pity to suspicion, suspicion to hatred. And then the crowd parted for Father Brenick. He approached the burned boy slowly, knelt beside the body, and touched the scorched ground with 2 fingers. When he looked up, his face was ash-gray. "These are not Sigmar's runes," he said, voice hollow, "nor any man's. This is something older, something deeper." Grell's jaw tightened. "Chaos." Brenick did not contradict him. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Then Krell holstered his pistol and straightened, his coat snapping in the cold breeze. "She is not leaving this village," he said flatly. "Not until we know the truth. Not until we are sure." He turned to Annaliese. "And if you are lying, girl, Sigmar's fire will burn you clean." The crowd watched as he stalked back toward the chapel, his boots crunching over frost. Annaliese stared at the scorched circle where Klaus had burned, her lips trembling. A faint curl of smoke rose from her palms, unnoticed by her parents as Greta clutched her tighter. Behind them, the scorched runes in the earth pulsed once more, like a heartbeat, then went dark. Chapter 12. Chaos Within. The days following Klaus Meyer's death fell heavy upon Falkendorf like an iron shroud. A fog, thick and sour, clung to the fields, seeping into every crack and chimney, never lifting, even under the sun. Crows gathered along the rooftops in silent flocks, heads twitching, beady eyes watching. The villagers spoke in hushed voices, fearful even of their own echoes. And Annaliese, she changed. It began in whispers, heard only in the still hours between midnight and dawn. Greta would wake to find her daughter standing by the hearth, eyes unfocused, mouth moving without sound. At first she thought it sleepwalking, but one night she crept closer and heard the words, guttural syllables that scraped across the soul like rusted blades. The girl's tongue moved in ways it should not have, forming sounds no child should ever speak. When Greta touched her, Annaliese turned, face slack and lifeless, and whispered a phrase that froze her to the marrow. "The walls of the world are thin, Mother. I can taste what's behind them." Then she collapsed. The next morning, Annaliese remembered none of it. She sat quietly at the table, eating stale bread, hands trembling slightly, as if her dreams had left splinters. But the voices grew bolder. One afternoon, during sermon, Father Brenick spoke the litany of fire. As he chanted, Annaliese stood from her pew with a sudden jerk, knocking over the candle holder beside her. Wax spilled across the stone floor in molten splashes. She walked down the aisle with rigid steps, arms held stiff at her sides, eyes fixed on the altar. "Child," Brenick began cautiously, "Are you well?" Annaliese opened her mouth, but it wasn't her voice that answered. "I am the Emmer Queen." The sound echoed off the chapel walls, too loud for her small frame, layered with a chorus of tones, male and female, high and low, as if a crowd spoke through her lungs. Her eyes rolled back, showing whites rimmed with flame. Her jaw hung open unnaturally wide, revealing scorched gums and black veins crawling up the roof of her mouth. Greta screamed. Hands rushed forward, but the air around Annaliese rippled with heat. The candle flames flared violently, turning blue, then black. One burst, showering molten wax and glass across the nearest pews. "I have crossed the veil," she hissed, her head twitching like a broken marionette. "I walked the charred spiral. I drank the blood of ash. I remember my name now. I am the fourth flame." Brennick stepped forward, holding up the hammer of Sigmar around his neck, chanting the rite of rejection. The symbol glowed faintly. For a moment, the voices stuttered. Annaliese's body jerked, convulsing as smoke poured from her nose. But then her gaze snapped toward him. "You would burn me, priest? I have walked in fire that breaks gods. You speak words like insects. Shall I show you what fire truly is?" A roar thundered through the chapel. The altar cracked, splinters flying in every direction. The stone beneath it burst, revealing scorched runes like those around Klaus's body. A wave of heat surged out in all directions, knocking the villagers backward. Wooden beams above blackened and split. The statue of Sigmar behind the altar wept blood from its eyes, thick, clotted streams running down the stone face. Father Brennick fell to his knees, screaming prayers over the roar. Then the girl collapsed. The temperature plummeted instantly. The candles went out. The runes vanished. Annaliese lay crumpled in the aisle, her dress singed, hair matted with sweat and soot. The chapel was silent, save for the flickering embers and the panicked whimpering of the villagers. One old man clutched his chest and sobbed. Another woman began vomiting uncontrollably, her mind unable to grasp what she had witnessed. Grell appeared in the doorway moments later, pistol drawn. He saw the carnage, scorched pews, a shattered altar, a statue bleeding, and walked straight to the unconscious girl. He stood over her, eyes like flint, pistol aimed at her skull. She stared. "Don't," Greta whispered from across the chapel, crawling toward them. "Please. She's still in there. She's my daughter." Grell didn't lower the weapon. But Annaliese opened her eyes. No glow, just gray. Human again. She blinked up at the witch hunter, then whispered, "What happened?" She didn't remember, or so she claimed. Krell said nothing, but slowly, reluctantly, he holstered the pistol. "Watch her," he growled. "That thing inside her, whatever it is, wants out. Next time, I won't hesitate." He turned and left. That night, in the Faulkner's cottage, Greta sat beside Annaliese's bed, brushing soot from her hair. The girl slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling, hands twitching now and then, as if caught in some half-remembered rhythm. Then in the dark, she spoke again, eyes still closed, voice not hers. "When the third flame falls, the river of blood will open. Tell the priest, the altar is a wound and it bleeds because it remembers." Greta choked back a sob. She did not wake her. And outside, beneath the cold stars, the black sun hung just behind the clouds, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. Chapter 13. Flight into the Forest. The night the hammer finally fell on Falkendorf was blacker than any before. The air felt swollen, too thick to breathe, and the mist clung to the ground like grave cloths. The village square stood empty save for a ring of torches staked into the mud, each one sputtering with oily, unnatural smoke that stained the air. At the center of that ring stood Matthias Krell. His hat was gone, his coat unbuttoned, exposing a chest crisscrossed with scars like old lightning strikes. His left hand gripped a pistol, his right a hammer engraved with purifying sigils. Both weapons were drawn, held not in show but in absolute intent. His voice carried like steel drawn across a whetstone. "She is no longer a child," he said, eyes scanning the faces of the villagers who had gathered in trembling silence. "She is a vessel, a daemon womb, a thing wearing the face of your daughter. We must cut it out before it ripens." Some villagers averted their eyes. Others muttered prayers. Old Hilda spat into the mud and clutched her hammer amulet until the chain snapped. Even Father Brennick's lips moved silently, though no words emerged. He looked pale and hollow, like a man watching his own house burn. Greta clutched Annaliese tightly in the shadows of the chapel doorway. The girl's body was rigid but trembling. Her eyes stared blankly at Krell. The torchlight danced on her face, highlighting the faint ghostly patterns beneath her skin, runes flickering in and out like something trapped beneath ice. "She's not a monster," Greta hissed, voice breaking. "She's my daughter." "Hmm?" "She's already killed one child," Krell snarled without looking at her. "And the next death will not be so merciful." He raised the pistol. "Bring her to me, Greta, or I will take her from you." Greta's breath came in shallow gasps. She looked to Hans. But Hans had sunk to his knees in the mud, hammer amulet pressed to his forehead, mumbling prayers over and over. He would not meet her eyes. "Sigmar's will," Krell growled, "or Chaos's feast. Choose." Greta chose. Without a word, she turned and bolted into the chapel, dragging Annaliese by the arm. She snatched a cloak from the pews and wrapped it around the girl, throwing the hood up. "We're leaving," she whispered fiercely. "No sound, no words, just run." Annaliese blinked up at her, confusion flickering in those ember-lit eyes. "Mother?" "Run." Greta shoved her out the side door of the chapel into the dark, wet grass beyond. Together they sprinted through the back alleyways of Falkendorf, their bare feet slapping against mud, the mist swallowing them whole. Behind them came the bellow of Krell's voice. No repeated, "Stop them!" A pistol shot cracked, echoing like a thunderclap. A lantern shattered near Greta's feet, spraying burning oil across the mud. She leapt over it, pulling Annaliese with her. Another shot whined past her ear, tearing splinters from the chapel's frame. The forest was ahead, a wall of black shapes shifting in the mist. The Drakvald. Greta didn't hesitate. She plunged in, dragging her daughter behind her as the brambles clawed at their legs and branches tore at their faces. The sounds of pursuit grew dimmer, shouts, boots, the bay of dogs. But the forest swallowed them like a mouth closing. It was darker here. The trees rose like cathedral pillars, their branches tangled into a ceiling that choked out the moonlight, roots twisted underfoot like the spines of buried beasts. The air was wet and cold, full of whispers that were not the wind. Annaliese stumbled and fell to her knees. Greta hauled her up, tears cutting clean tracks down her soot-streaked cheeks. "Keep moving," she panted. "We have to." "Mother," Annaliese said softly, "he's here." Greta froze. The mist ahead thickened, curling into shapes, and from between two massive oaks stepped the pale boy. But he was not a boy anymore. He had kept the shape of one, small, thin, barefoot, but his skin glowed faintly with an inner luminescence, veins of red flickering beneath the white like cracks in cooling stone. His eyes were no longer black pits, but twin furnaces of smoldering coal. His smile was the same, but it was stretched too wide, the corners of his mouth splitting like paper to reveal teeth, long, narrow, serrated like a saw. His tunic fluttered, though there was no wind, and where his feet touched the earth, moss turned black and shriveled. "Little flame," he said, voice echoing in a dozen tones at once. "You've come home." Greta shoved Annaliese behind her, fumbling for the small kitchen knife she had hidden in her cloak. It looked absurdly small in her shaking hand. "Stay back," she hissed. The demon tilted its head. "And what will you do with that?" it asked gently. "Cut me? Feed me?" It stepped closer. The trees bent inward, their bark cracking like ribs. Behind Greta, Annaliese's breathing quickened. Her skin glowed faintly, runes crawling up her neck like living tattoos. "I've waited for you," the demon said to Annaliese. "Through fire, through flesh, through all the hammers they've swung to break you. But still you came." "Go away," Annaliese whispered, but the voice that left her throat was not hers. It was deeper, older. "I'm not yours." The demon smiled wider, its teeth clicking. "You are mine. You've always been mine. The fourth flame, the crown of cinders, the vessel carved in womb and altar both." Greta lunged forward with the knife, slashing wildly. The blade sank into the boy's shoulder and met no resistance. It passed through like cutting water. The demon's form rippled, then reformed, unmarked. It didn't even blink. Instead, it placed a hand, small, pale, on Greta's wrist. Her skin hissed where it touched. Blisters bubbled up instantly, flesh searing black in the shape of its fingers. She screamed and fell back, clutching the wound. The demon turned back to Annaliese. "Come," it whispered. "The hammer can't reach you here. Only the flame." "Only me." Annaliese trembled, her eyes flickering between gray and ember orange. Her lips moved, whispering a wordless litany. The trees groaned. The ground beneath her cracked. She raised one hand, and fire, cold, black fire, snaked around her fingers like serpents. "No," she hissed, "not yet." The demon's smile faltered. And then shouts, far off in the mist. The baying of Krell's hounds. The crack of a pistol. The demon hissed like steam and stepped backward, its body unraveling into pale strands of mist. Its eyes burned bright one last time. "Soon, little flame," it whispered. "Soon, you will stop pretending." Then it vanished, leaving only the smell of scorched moss. Greta scrambled to her feet, seizing Annaliese's arm. "We have to move," she gasped. "Now." Annaliese stared at the space where the demon had stood, her face unreadable. Her hand still glowed faintly with black fire. She closed it into a fist until her nails drew blood. And together they fled deeper into the Drakewald, the trees closing behind them like a door. Krell's voice and torches fading to nothing. Chapter 14. The Pact Offered. The Drakewald was no longer a forest. It was a cathedral of nightmares. Greta and Annaliese stumbled deeper into the ancient trees, past roots as thick as serpents and brambles like razors. The air grew humid and heavy, thick with the stink of rot and something sweeter, burnt honey and charred flesh. The mist moved like living tissue, coiling around their ankles, clinging to their faces. Somewhere behind them the baying of Krell's hounds grew faint, swallowed by the dark. Here, time lost meaning. The trunks twisted into shapes of screaming faces. Knots in the wood pulsed faintly like swollen veins. Birds were silent. Insects did not stir. The forest exhaled a single long breath that smelled like a crypt. Greta clutched Annaliese's hand tightly, her palms slick with blood from the blistered burns the daemon had left. Her chest heaved. "Not much farther," she whispered, though she had no idea where she was going. "We'll find a way out." "We will." But Annaliese had stopped listening. She felt the forest as much as saw it. The trees whispered to her. The ground hummed beneath her bare feet. Her skin crawled with heat, not fever but pressure, like a dam ready to burst. Runes flickered faintly under her flesh, glowing and fading with each heartbeat. She no longer felt lost. She felt summoned. A clearing opened ahead. It was not natural. No roots crossed it, no bramble grew in its center. The ground there was blackened earth, cracked like cooling lava. In its center rose a mound of stones shaped like an altar, but older, jagged, draped with charred hides. Candles made of tallow, gray and cracked, burned with sickly flames despite the lack of wind. The air buzzed faintly, a sound like 1,000 flies inside her skull. Greta pulled back. "We shouldn't be here," she muttered. "Sigmar preserve us." But Annaliese stepped forward, and the demon returned. It did not emerge from the trees this time. It rose from the ground itself, clawing its way out of the cracks in the earth, as if it had always been waiting just beneath the surface. It still wore the pale boy's shape, but that shape was breaking. Its limbs were too long now, elbows bent backward, nails black and hooked. Its face split from chin to brow, revealing glimpses of something formless within, a twisting mass of ash and ember. Its eyes burned like two coals driven into a skull, and when it smiled, the sound was like bones grinding. "Little flame," it said, its voice echoing from every corner of the clearing. "Little hammer child, do you feel it now?" His lips trembled. "What are you?" The demon tilted its head. "Not what, who? You've seen me in your dreams, the throne, the black sun, the crown of cinders, the one you call the skeleton." It spread its hands, skin tearing to reveal glowing fissures beneath. "I am the fourth flame. I am the hunger beneath this land, and you," it stepped closer, "are my vessel." Greta gasped. "No." She grabbed Annaliese's arm. "Don't listen, it's lying." But the daemon ignored her. It knelt, its face level with Annaliese's. The smell of scorched meat filled her nose. "This land was once my temple," it whispered. "Long before Sigmar's petty empire built its chapel atop my wound. Your altar is my prison, your village is my cage. But you," it brushed a claw against Annaliese's chest, over her heart, where the rune had burned through. "You are my key." The rune beneath her skin flared. Annaliese gasped, her knees buckling as heat raced through her veins. Visions flooded her mind, the earth cracking open, towers of bone rising from fields of ash, rivers of molten iron winding like serpents, crowds screaming and bowing before her. She saw herself crowned, seated on the throne of bone, her hands blazing with black fire. "No," she whispered. I'm not. The demon's voice deepened, now a chorus of thousands. "You are. They beat you, burned you, branded you, and still you stand. They fear you because they know you are not their god's toy. You are mine, my vessel, my queen." It reached into its own chest, fingers sinking into the fissures of light, and drew out something glowing. A shard of burning ash shaped like a heart. It pulsed with each of Annaliese's heartbeats. "Take it," the demon breathed. "Take your birthright. Power without chains, flame without limit, control instead of fear." Greta stepped between them, knife raised, though her hand shook. "Stay away from her." The demon did not even glance at her. It flicked one claw, and Greta flew backward, slammed into a tree with a sickening crack. She slid to the ground, coughing blood, the knife falling from her numb fingers. Annaliese screamed, falling to her knees beside her mother. "Stop! Don't hurt her!" The daemon leaned close, its burning eyes filling her vision. "Then choose, little flame. Submit, and I will heal her. Refuse, and she will die like all the others." It held out the burning heart. The light from it filled the clearing, casting long, writhing shadows across the trees. Annaliese's own heart hammered. The heat inside her built to a painful crescendo. The rune on her chest burned like molten iron. Her hands trembled, reaching forward without a command. Her mother gasped wetly, blood on her lips, whispering her name. Annaliese. Don't. The demon's smile widened, teeth endless. Take it, it whispered. Take your throne. The girl's fingertips brushed the burning heart. The clearing shuddered. The candles flared. The ground cracked open, spilling rivulets of black flame. And Annaliese felt the power surge into her like a tide. Chapter 15. The Burning Village. The night Falkendorf burned began in silence. The mist that had long plagued the village withdrew, slinking back toward the Drakwold like a beaten dog. The sky above was black and clear, the stars sharp as knives. For the first time in weeks, the villagers could see the outlines of the old bell tower, the crooked rooftops, the chapel's cracked steeple. It might almost have felt like peace, if not for the smell of smoke already crawling under their door. Annaliese lay hidden in the forest with her mother, crouched beneath the twisted roots of an ancient oak. Greta's breath rattled shallowly in her chest, the bruises from the demon's blow livid purple across her ribs. She was alive, but barely. Annaliese kept one hand pressed to her mother's side, whispering frantic words she no longer knew the meaning of. Power flickered under her skin like coals smothered by ash. Loud and Falkendorf torches flared. They had not been lit by Krell's men. They had been lit by the cult. It began with 3 villagers, faces pale and hollow-eyed, kneeling before the chapel altar after midnight. They were the ones who had always lingered near Annaliese, the ones who left her offerings of bread and salt, who whispered Ember Child instead of Witch. Now their devotion cracked open like rotten fruit. They carved symbols into their palms with bone knives and pressed their bleeding hands to the altar, whispering her name. The runes under the chapel awakened. Heat rolled up from the stones, warping the air. Candles guttered and flared, and then, through their blood, something answered. The demon did not stride out of the forest in a blaze of glory. It slid into Falkendorf like smoke through a keyhole, creeping down throats, seeping into minds. It whispered into their ears as they slept, dripping its hunger into their dreams. By dawn, a dozen more had joined the 3 at the altar. Farmers, seamstresses, even a guardsman. They stood swaying, blood dripping from their hands, eyes rolled white, muttering the same phrase over and over. Ember Queen, 4th Flame, Crown of Cinders. When they rose, they were no longer villagers. Their skin was pale and cracked, black veins crawling up their necks like ink and water. Their eyes glowed faintly orange. Their mouths moved, but the voice was not theirs. It was the daemon's, many-throated and eager. It gave them a single command: burn it clean. The first fire began at the tannery. Thick, greasy smoke rolled out, clogging the sky. Within minutes, flames leapt from roof to roof. Shouts rang out as villagers awoke to find their homes alight. Water buckets were overturned. But the fire was not normal. No matter how much water they threw, it hissed and flared higher, crawling up walls like living serpents. The heat blistered skin at a distance. Straw roofs turned to torches in seconds. Those touched by the demon walked calmly through it all. They tipped oil onto doors, dragged screaming neighbors from their homes, and cut them down with scythes and cleavers if they resisted. Some knelt in the mud to daub runes in soot and blood, feeding the flames with their prayers. Father Brennick rushed from the chapel into the square, hammer raised high. "Stop this madness," he roared. "Sigmar's wrath will—" Scythe swung. He buried itself in his side. Brennick staggered, eyes wide, staring down at the blade sunk into his ribs. The cultist holding it grinned with cracked lips, veins glowing under his skin. Before the priest could speak, another struck him with a torch, setting his robes aflame. He dropped to his knees, clutching at the wound as his hair and beard ignited. His prayers turned to screams. The villagers fled, dragging their children through alleys already choked with fire. Krell stood at the well, pistol drawn, firing shot after shot into the cultists. His bullets tore through heads and chests, splattering blood across the cobbles. But they did not stop coming. Their bodies burned as they fell, lighting the mud with smoldering flesh. He drew his second pistol and fired again, swearing, sweat and soot dripping from his face. "Where is she?" he bellowed over the roar of flames. "Where is the girl?" Up on the hillside, Annaliese saw the glow rising from Falkendorf, a false dawn, orange and black. Screams floated through the trees, distant but unmistakable. The rune beneath her skin pulsed, hot as molten iron. Her hands clenched in the dirt. "They're calling for you," Greta rasped, coughing blood. "It's them, not you. Them, stay here, stay hidden." Annaliese trembled. She could hear them even from here, voices rising through the fire, chanting, crying her name. Ember Queen, Ember Queen. Her name had become a weapon. Below, the chapel's steeple collapsed in a shower of sparks. The bell tumbled into the square and shattered like an eggshell. The flames twisted upward into a spire, curling like a claw. Faces formed in the smoke, grinning skulls, screaming mouths, antlers and wings, vanishing and reforming with each pulse of the fire. And in the heart of the blaze, where the cult knelt in a circle, Annaliese saw him, the demon, wearing no boy's face now. It loomed as a pillar of white fire, shaped like a man but far taller, its face a hollow mask of light, its hands dripping ash. It spread its arms to the sky as if embracing the burning village. "This is your throne," it whispered inside Annalise's skull. "They have built it for you. Come and claim it." Greta clutched her arm. "Don't listen, don't look." Annaliese's eyes filled with tears. The fire called to her, warm and familiar, and for a moment she wanted to step into it, to burn and be reborn. Her fingers twitched. Runes crawled up her wrists like living things, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. Down below, the cult raised their arms to the flames, blood dripping from their palms. "All hail the Ember Queen!" they shrieked, voices breaking. "Crown of cinders, fourth flame!" The fire surged higher, swallowing the last of Falkendorf's roofs. Villagers fell screaming into the mud, some dragged into the flames by clawing hands, their flesh popping and splitting as the heat consumed them. Horses shrieked in their stables, their hides blistering and sloughing off before they collapsed. The smell of burning hair and meat filled the air, thick enough to taste. Krell fought his way toward the chapel, hammer drawn now, swearing Sigmar's name. His coat was scorched, his hat gone, his face streaked with soot and blood. "Where are you, witch?" he snarled. "Show yourself!" But Annaliese stayed on the hillside, trembling, her mother's blood on her hands, the fire's call in her head. Below, the demon's burning shape turned its faceless mask toward her. It raised one clawed hand in a gesture of beckoning, and in her mind she heard its voice again. "Your people are already mine. Only you remain. Take your throne, Ember Queen, or watch them all burn without you. This will be your edict." The flames leapt higher, swallowing Falkendorf whole. Chapter 16. Sigmar's Wrath. The village of Falkendorf was a skeleton of itself, a smoldering ruin of cracked stone and molten timber. Firelight painted the clouds blood red, casting twisted silhouettes of collapsed roofs and flailing bodies. Screams still echoed from alleys choked with smoke. Charred corpses twitched as if trying to rise again. And in the heart of the inferno, beneath the shadow of the fallen chapel, the demon stood wreathed in flame. Its form now towered over the ruins, no longer bound to any disguise. It was a thing of fire and ash given shape, a mockery of manhood, formed of whips of flame coiled into limbs and a skull of cracked obsidian lit from within. Spines of fire jutted from its back like wings. Around it the cult knelt in ecstasy, their bodies blackened with soot, mouths split open in mindless praise. All hail the Ember Queen! All hail the fourth flame! But Annaliese had not come. And Matthias Krell still lived. He bled from a gash down his thigh. A second burn seared into the meat of his shoulder. Half his coat was gone. His face was caked with grime and ash, one eye swollen shut. Yet he limped through the fire and ruin, dragging behind him a sealed iron box bound in 7 latches and stitched in steel-inked scripture. He staggered into the ruins of the chapel, now little more than scorched stones and glowing rubble. Above, the bell hung broken in its frame, half melted and silent. Rain had begun to fall, barely a mist, but the fire refused to die. Krell fell to one knee before the shattered altar and began to unlock the box. "Sigmar," he muttered, "you old silent bastard, hear me now." Inside the box lay a book bound in flesh, parchment made from heretic skin, inked with the blood of a burned inquisitor. The script glowed faintly, humming with restrained fury. A forbidden rite, meant only for the dying, the damned, or the desperate. Krell tore the silver clasp from his wrist and bit his own thumb, spitting blood onto the open page. Then he began to speak. The invocation of celestial wrath was not a prayer. It was a summons, a violent plea to the divine to intervene in the mortal world in full fury. Its words were not meant to be heard by human ears. Each syllable burned Krell's throat. Each line made his skin crawl. His bones ached as the words left his mouth. By the comet, by the hammer, by the flame that shatters the false crown. The air thickened. The smoke recoiled. By the fury of Galmaraz, by the fire of the Father who judges the unjust. The clouds above twisted into a spiral, darkening into a storm-backed vortex. Thunder growled low and hungry. Sparks rained from the air. By Sigmar's wrath I call the storm. I call the hammer's fall. And the sky split. A bolt of lightning carved through the clouds, no ordinary strike, but a column of divine fire, white and pure, descending from the heavens with the force of a falling god. It slammed into the center of the square, where the cult knelt in prayer. There was no warning. There was no mercy. The explosion was blinding. Half the square disintegrated. The stone cracked and split. Bodies were incinerated mid-chant, their bones turned to vapor. Those farther from the center burst into flame, flailing and screaming, eyes boiling in their sockets as divine fire tore through their corrupted flesh. Their voices, once crying praise to the Ember Queen, turned to shrieks of agony. One man staggered out of the blast radius, his skin hanging in strips, eyes black with smoke. He dropped to his knees and vomited blood before his head cracked open from the heat, spilling fire instead of brains. The demon reeled back, screeching in a voice that tore the sky. Trees and flame. It howled. Its form faltered, fire shuddering, edges unraveling into tendrils of smoke. The lightning struck again, a second bolt, then a third, crashing down with thunder that flattened trees and split the very earth. Krell stood beneath the altar, arms raised, blood streaming down his face. The rite was still pouring from his mouth, now in a language no longer human. His voice was not his own, it rang deeper, echoing through the bones of every man, woman, and child still alive in Falkendorf. The storm raged. The demon fought to stay bound to the world. Its wings of fire shattered, falling in chunks of ember that scorched the earth. It lunged at Krell, only to be struck mid-leap by a spear of lightning that impaled it through the chest. Its body convulsed, cracking open along its spine. From within burst black flame and ash, writhing serpents of chaos energy. The demon screamed as it burned, not in mortal fire, but in holy wrath. Its body twisted into a spiral of smoke, pulled upward into the storm clouds above. Krell fell to the ground, coughing blood. The book burned in his hands, then crumpled to ash. The sky above rumbled, but no more lightning came. Silence followed. Where once there had been 50 cultists, now only a circle of ash remained, white, clean, and still glowing faintly. Krell looked upon his work with a hollow stare, his chest heaving. But he knew the truth. The demon was not gone, only banished. He looked to the hills where the fire still flickered behind the tree line, where the girl still waited. He could feel it even now, a tether between them. Her rune still pulsed. The vessel still lived. And somewhere deep in the forest the flame still whispered. Chapter 17. Ashes of Innocence. The forest opened to her like a wound. Annaliese moved through the trees as though in a trance, her bare feet leaving faint glowing prints on the damp leaves. The air around her vibrated with the last echoes of the storm Krell had summoned, low rumbles like a dying beast's growl, a smell of ozone sharp enough to sting her tongue. Through the tangle of branches she could see it. The sky above Falkendorf ripped open, threads of lightning still dangling from the clouds like torn veins. Smoke rose from what had once been her village, curling upward in long black fingers. She could taste the death on the wind. Greta lay slumped against the roots of the ancient oak where Annaliese had left her. Her face was pale and waxy, her breaths shallow and rattling. The blow she had taken from the demon had broken more than ribs. Her blood smelled wrong, heavy with iron. Annaliese brushed her mother's hair back and whispered a lullaby, but her own voice cracked and bled into the other voice now living behind her teeth. "You're wasting time." It spoke without sound, coiling around her mind like a serpent. She squeezed her eyes shut. "No," she whispered, "not now." "Yes, now. They are mine already. Look at your village, my altar of ash. Look at what your hammer priest has done. He called the storm and slaughtered them in my name, not Sigmar's. Mine." Annaliese's hands shook. Sparks danced across her fingertips, black and orange. She stood, leaving her mother slumped against the tree, and began walking toward the ruins of Falkendorf. The closer she came, the hotter her blood felt, thick and molten, like a river trying to escape its banks. The demon laughed in her head. "This is where you belong, little queen. Not hiding in the dirt, on the pyre, above it, commanding it." She emerged from the tree line. The village was unrecognizable. Houses had collapsed into heaps of black timber and glowing cinders. The well had boiled dry and cracked open like a skull. The square was a crater, its cobbles split by lightning, its ash coated with what had once been people. Limbs stuck out of the rubble like roots, hands clawing at nothing, faces burned to white masks. Ravens hopped among them, pecking at still smoking flesh. And in the center stood Matthias Krell. His coat hung in scorched strips. His pistol was gone, his hammer cracked. He swayed on his feet, blood seeping through the cloth around his thigh. The look in his one good eye was not triumph, but grim exhaustion. A soldier waiting for the next blow he cannot block. Annaliese stepped into the square, her hood falling back. Her skin glimmered with faint runes that crawled like worms beneath her flesh. Her eyes glowed but weakly, flickering as though some unseen wind tried to snuff them out. Krell raised the broken hammer. "Stay where you are," he rasped. "It's not done with you yet." Annaliese's lips moved, but the words that spilled out were not her own. They were deep, sonorous, echoing, as though spoken in a cavern. Little hammer man," You dare strike my altar with your false thunder?" Her head jerked violently, eyes wide. She gasped, "Stop!" Her back arched, and she screamed. It was a sound like metal tearing. The runes under her skin ignited all at once, glowing bright enough to paint the ashes around her orange. Black fire erupted from her palms, coiling upward in serpents. Her feet left the ground, rising inches into the air, her hair lifted, writhing like snakes. Inside her mind, the demon pressed harder. "Enough pretending. You wanted power. You wanted to be free of their fear. Take it. Burn him. Burn everything." "No," Annaliese shouted aloud, tears streaking down her glowing cheeks. "I won't." Her arms jerked forward involuntarily. Black fire lashed out, striking the ruins where Krell stood. The cobbles exploded, shards of stone whistling through the air. One piece sliced open his brow. Blood ran into his eye, but he did not retreat. He dropped the hammer and staggered closer. "Fight it, girl," he barked, voice ragged. "Don't let it take you. Fight!" She screamed again. The fire twisted back toward herself, wrapping round her torso like a living coil, searing her dress, burning her skin. She convulsed mid-air. The demon's voice thundered through her lungs. "You are me." Her eyes went fully ember orange. Her fingers curled into claws. She landed hard on her knees, hands pressed to her temples, nails drawing blood. The ground around her blackened, spider-webbed cracks glowing with inner light. Grell limped closer, coughing blood. "Then die fighting it," he snarled, "or live as a monster. But choose." The demon roared through her. "Choose me." Annaliese dug her fingers into the earth, panting, tears falling onto the scorched stone and hissing to steam. She could feel the throne in her mind again. The black sun above it, the bones beneath her feet, the crown of cinders hovering just out of reach. She could feel the power, like a tide waiting to crush her. And she could feel her mother's blood on her hands. She let out a scream, not of pain, but of defiance. The black fire surged outward in a ring, blasting Krell backward into a collapsed wall. He struck it hard, ribs cracking, but still he raised his head to see what she would do. Annaliese stood. Her skin flickered between light and shadow, runes blazing, her small frame trembling like a candle about to blow out. Her voice came in two tones at once, hers and the demon's. "I am not your vessel. You are mine. I am not your queen. You are my flame." Her hands lifted. Fire writhed between them, white and black, clashing, sparking like a forge. The air around her warped and cracked. Her body convulsed as the two forces fought inside her. Sigmar's storm still echoing through her veins from Krell's right, the daemon's power clawing to escape. The square became a battlefield of unseen wills. Lightning flickered above as black fire rose from below. The very air screamed. Annaliese's knees buckled, but she held on. Blood ran from her nose, her mouth, her ears. The runes burned brighter than ever, then dimmed, then flared again, pulsing like a heart. She fell to her knees, clutching her skull. "I won't," she whispered, voice shaking. "I won't be yours." Inside her head, the demon hissed like a furnace. "And burn yourself with me." And the fire within her erupted. The ashes of the village lifted into the air, swirling around her like a storm of gray snow. They formed shapes, faces, hands, screaming mouths, spiraling upward into a vortex of smoke and light. Krell shielded his face as the wind howled. Annaliese knelt in the eye of the storm, every muscle trembling, every breath a war between two gods inside a child's body. She pressed her palms to the ground, and for the first time the demon hesitated. Its voice cracked. "Little flame, what are you doing?" Her teeth bared. "Choosing." The black fire around her collapsed inward, swallowing her in a cocoon of ash and light. For a heartbeat there was silence, just a child kneeling in a sea of death. Then the vortex exploded outward, flinging cinders across the square. When the dust cleared, Annaliese was still on her knees. Her eyes were gray again, her hands trembled, blistered and bleeding. The runes had dimmed to faint scars. But the demon's voice was gone. And behind her, Krell staggered to his feet, one hand clutching his ribs, staring at her with something between awe and dread. The storm above Falkendorf faded. Only ashes drifted down, soft and cold, settling over what was left of the village like snow. In the center of it all kneeled Annaliese, no longer child, not yet queen, a vessel of war, smoldering in silence. Chapter 18. The Crown of Cinders. Annaliese collapsed into the ash, her hands sinking wrist-deep into the gray powder that had once been wood, stone, and flesh. Her lungs burned as she sucked in a breath thick with soot. Everything around her was silent now. No screaming cultists, no crackle of fire, only the faint hiss of cooling embers. The ruined village stretched in every direction like a graveyard of shadows. But inside her head the war still raged. The demon had not vanished with the storm. It had retreated inward, coiling tighter and tighter into the dark places of her mind. It waited there like a predator in a burrow, claws flexing. She felt it under her skin, moving in her veins like molten iron, whispering behind her heartbeat. You cannot banish fire. You can only smother it. And smothered fire still waits. She closed her eyes. The world of ash dissolved, and she was inside. She stood barefoot on a plain of cinders that stretched forever, glowing faintly like dying stars. Black ash fell from a sky of red iron clouds. In the distance rose the throne she had seen in every dream, a grotesque lattice of bone fused with scorched steel, veins of molten fire running through it. The black sun loomed above, its light pressing down like a weight, and at the foot of the throne stood the demon. It no longer wore any disguise. It was a figure of shifting fire and shadow, its limbs elongating and snapping back like a spider's. Its skull face grinned without flesh, hollow sockets filled with coals, wings of charred bone sprouted from its back, each feather dripping sparks. The sound of its breathing was the roar of a forge. "Little flame," it said softly, its many voices echoing across the plain. "You finally came home." Annaliese felt her knees tremble but forced herself to stand straight. She was barefoot, her simple dress hanging in tatters. Under her skin the runes glowed faintly, like buried embers. "I'm not yours," she said. Her voice shook, but it carried. The demon tilted its head, smile widening. "You already wear my mark. You've burned with my power. Even now your heart beats with my fire." It stepped closer, leaving scorched footprints in the cinders. "Kill me and you will kill yourself. Accept me and you will live. You will burn brighter than all their little hammers and comets." It raised a clawed hand. A shape coalesced in the air between them, a crown of ash and bone, smoldering with a dull orange glow. It drifted above its palm like a dying coal. "The crown of cinders," it whispered. "Yours by right. Take it, and the fourth flame will be reborn." Annaliese stared at it. The crown pulsed in time with her heartbeat. With each pulse, she saw visions. Armies kneeling before her, cities aflame, rivers boiling away to steam. She felt the power in her blood rise like a tide, demanding to be let loose. But then another vision surfaced. Her mother slumped under the oak tree, blood on her lips. Klaus Mayer's charred body in the circle of runes, the villagers screaming as lightning struck. She clenched her fists. "I don't want your power," she said. "I just want to be free." The demon's laugh was like stone grinding on stone. "There is no freedom without power. Without me, you are nothing but a scared child. With me, you are a god." It stepped closer, looming over her now. Its face rippled, forming the features of Greta for a heartbeat, then Krell's, then Father Brinnick's, each one twisted and burned. "They will hunt you until you die," it hissed. "They will burn you on a pyre and cheer as your skin peels. But take my crown, and you will burn them instead. Take it, and no hammer, no god, no storm can touch you." The crown floated between them, its ash drifting like snow. Annaliese felt her hands rise, trembling, as though drawn by invisible strings. The closer they came to the crown, the hotter her blood became. Her skin split along the runes, tiny fissures of glowing light opening to reveal flame beneath. The daemon's voice filled her head. "Take it, take it, take it." She was inches away. The crown's heat blistered her fingertips. Her heartbeat thundered. She could feel herself slipping, the world narrowing to that one smoldering relic. Then she dug her nails into her own palms, hard enough to draw blood. The sting cut through the fog. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." The demon's smile faltered. "You'll die without me." "Then I'll die," she said, louder now, "but I'll die as myself." She seized the crown with both hands. It burned her instantly, skin blackening, bones cracking, but she didn't let go. She wrenched it apart. Ash and ember exploded outward like a dying star, tearing across the plain. The demon screamed, a sound of pure fury and pain, its form unraveling into streams of black fire. Little flame, no. It lunged for her, claws reaching, but she held the crown high and crushed it between her palms. The explosion lit the sky white, the black sun cracked like glass, the throne shuddered and split, its skulls falling to dust. The demon howled as its body broke apart, its voice shredding into whispers. "If you kill me, you kill yourself." Annaliese fell to her knees, ash swirling around her. Her body burned from the inside out. She felt her heart stop, then surge, then stop again. She coughed blood, black and hot, onto the cinder ground. Her vision dimmed. The demon dissolved into nothing, leaving only its voice echoing faintly. "We will burn together." The plain began to collapse, cinders falling away into a void. The throne crumbled. The black sun went out. And Annaliese fell into the dark, her body shattering into embers as she tumbled, her last thought not of power, but of her mother's face. Then, silence, and only the sound of cinders falling like snow. Chapter 19. The Choice Made. The world returned as a tremor. Annaliese gasped awake with ash in her mouth, coughing up black phlegm that hissed as it hit the ground. She lay sprawled in the ruins of Falkendorf, her fingers clawed into the cobbles like she had tried to hold on to the earth itself. Her nails were cracked, her palms blistered, her dress scorched to tatters. Steam rose from her skin in faint wisps, curling into the cold air. Around her the village was unrecognizable. The chapel's broken stones glowed faintly like dying coals. Roofs had collapsed into heaps of embers. Burned timbers jutted up like the ribs of some slaughtered beast. The storm had ended, but the sky above was still bruised and swollen, clouds lit from beneath by the glow of smoldering wood. Ash fell thick as snow, sticking to her hair and lashes. She pushed herself up onto her knees. Every movement felt like tearing open new wounds. She looked down at her hands. The runes that had once crawled under her skin were now faint scars, but her fingers still trembled with flickers of black fire that guttered and died before they could form shapes. Her eyes burned. She could feel it, something inside her, smaller now but alive, a coal still smoldering where a furnace had been, even as the strength turned to phobia. The demon was gone, but its echo was not. She could still taste its words on her tongue, still feel its claws in her thoughts, still hear faintly its laughter, like the hiss of embers cooling in water. That is to put into it a vision of one's own. She rose to her feet slowly, swaying. Her hair hung in wet strands, streaked with ash. Her bare feet sank into the blackened mud, leaving faint glowing footprints as she walked. Every breath she took felt like inhaling soot and blood. Yet she walked on. Bodies littered the square. What had been villagers and cultists alike were now indistinguishable heaps of blackened meat and cracked bone. Hands frozen in clawing gestures jutted from rubble. Faces were cooked to eyeless masks. Mouths open mid-scream. Even the cobbles were scorched with silhouettes, white outlines where people had stood when the lightning struck. It was a massacre frozen in mid-mation. Krell lay slumped against a broken wall at the edge of the square. He was alive, but barely. His chest heaved in shallow, wet breaths. One arm bent at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked his shirt, turning it black. His good eye fluttered open as Annaliese approached, glowing footprints hissing in the ash. He raised a trembling hand as though to ward her off. "Stay back!" His voice was ragged, like stone dragged over iron. "If it's still in you, end me before it takes you." She stopped before him. For a heartbeat, the ember light behind her eyes flared brighter, casting his face in orange glow. She could feel the daemon's echo stirring, urging her to finish him, to burn him where he sat and walk away crowned. She knelt instead. Krell's hand dropped. His chest rose and fell. He watched her silently, suspicion and something like sorrow flickering across his face. Annaliese placed her scorched palm against his forehead. The old hunger inside her hissed, but she forced it back, teeth bared. Instead of fire, only warmth flowed from her touch, weak, pale, but enough to steady his breathing. His eyes fluttered shut. He didn't thank her. She stood again. The air around her shimmered faintly, as though heat still radiated from her skin. Her eyes blazed with a dull orange glow, not the wild furnace of before, but something contained, like a candle behind glass. She could feel the demon's coal still buried deep inside her, waiting. It whispered once, faintly, "We're not finished." She looked up at the sky. The black sun that had hung over her dreams was gone. In its place was only cloud, heavy and dark. A few snowflakes mingled with the ash, cold against her skin. She did not know if she had killed the daemon, chained it, or simply become its jailer. She only knew that something inside her was forever changed. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps still in the forest, perhaps not. Annaliese turned from the square. She began to walk. Each step left glowing footprints in the ash that slowly faded as she passed. Behind her, the ruins of Falkendorf smoldered, lit only by the weak glow of dying fires and the faint outline of Krell slumped against the wall. Before her stretched the Drakewald, black and endless, branches like spears reaching out to claim her. She did not look back. She walked into the mist, the ember light in her eyes steady but dim, her shadow stretching long across the ruin. She was no longer the child who had played in these streets. She was no longer the vessel who had knelt before the demon's throne. Whether she had killed it or accepted it, she did not yet know. But she knew this. The Ember Queen had begun her walk alone, and somewhere deep inside, a coal still smoldered. Chapter 20. The Ember Vale. In the shadow of the Empire, where maps fade into myth and the wilderness reclaims what men forget, there is a name spoken only in whispers. The Ember Vale. Not a person, they say, a curse, a storm wrapped in skin, a girl of fire and ash who walks barefoot through plague-ridden fields, whose eyes shine like dying stars, whose hands never touch steel, but whose steps bring ruin. They tell her story in 100 ways, but all begin the same. She appears before catastrophe. In the frozen highlands of Nordland, they tell of a bitter winter where wolves broke through village walls, howled through homes, and dragged children into the snow. Survivors speak of a hooded girl who came the day before, silent, cloaked in gray, with hair like scorched threads and eyes like smoldering coal. She stood in the square, watching the sky as snow fell around her, unmoving. When asked her name, she said only, "The storm won't kill you, but what follows might." By morning the wolves were gone. So was the girl, but the village was burned to its bones, with no tracks leading in or out. In the Reikland forest, travelers tell of a bandit king named Ershard, whose crimson banners once ruled the woods. He captured the girl one spring, drawn by tales of her fire, chained her in iron, paraded her through his war camp. She said nothing, did nothing, for 3 days. On the 4th, the sky turned black. When Ershard tried to brand her, the iron turned to slag in his hand. He screamed as flames erupted from her skin, swallowing him whole. His men fled into the trees. What was left of the camp, horses, wagons, men, was found a week later, fused into a single glassy crater, still warm to the touch. In Middenheim, a dying elector count whispered to his priest of a visitor who came in the night, a girl wrapped in gray, barefoot, her presence flickering like heat waves. She placed a hand on his chest, not in healing, but in mourning. She told him 3 secrets. His son was not his blood. His empire would crumble within a decade. And she, the Ember Veil, would be the last thing he'd see. He died before dawn, his lungs filled with smoke, though no fire had touched the palace. Across the provinces, songs echo in secret taverns and torchlit camps, in plague-ravaged ruins. Catch on the wind, flame in the snow. The girl in gray walks where none should go. One hand open, the other sealed tight. She'll whisper your death just before night. But not all call her Omen. Some call her Saint. In the shattered hamlets near the Black Gulf, a tribe once left to rot by noble decree tells of the girl who walked through their disease-ridden streets. She touched the sick, whispered in their ears, and brought fire, not to kill but to purge. The plague died with the flames, and those who survived wore ash on their brows and whispered her name in reverence. Ember Queen, crownless, merciful in fire. But whatever mercy she gave was not free. Those same survivors awoke days later to find their dead had risen, not as corpses, but burning silhouettes with hollow eyes. They wandered into the woods, weeping sparks, and were never seen again. In Altor's libraries, scholars argue, was she a remnant of chaos, a living spark of a fallen demon, or the last miracle of Sigmar, burned beyond recognition? The records of Falkendorf are gone, wiped clean, their parchment blistered, their ink fused. But one scrap survives, a child's drawing etched into blackened stone. A girl, a son, a crown made of flame, and scrawled beneath in a shaky hand. Since he walked away, but the fire followed. None know where she is now. Some claim she became a witch, living deep within the Drakewald, guarded by beasts made of coal and thorn. Others say she walks the battlefields of the Empire before the fighting begins, whispering into the ears of generals about which men will die screaming. A few believe she no longer walks at all, but burns beneath the earth, waiting for the next time men forget the price of power. But one thing is always the same. When disaster looms, when flames flicker without wind, when ash falls from a clear sky, They say she is already there, watching, waiting, her eyes glowing through the smoke. Not queen, not child, only the ember veil and the whisper of a fire you'll never see coming until the world burns around you.